Jai Hind everyone. I, Pradeep Kumar Tripathi, Assistant Professor in Department of Information Technology. Today we have discussed about the DBMS lecture series that is suitable for the third year student of Akgec University. So let's start the lectures of DBMS. Today we have discussed about the transaction, how the transaction can be implemented in the particular DBMS and how it can be from one state to another state, how we can manage these transactions in runtime environment. So let's start from the beginning. This is a basic outline of our PPT presentation. So let's start. Transaction concept. Then we will discuss about the transaction state, concurrent execution, serializability, recoverability, and implementation of isolation. We can discuss about the transaction definition in SQL, and last we can discuss about the testing for the serializability. So let's start from the concept of transaction. What is transaction and how the transaction can be implemented in the particular lectures. So what is DBMS and how in particular DBMS we can use the transaction. So in the previous lecture we have also discussed about the what is DBMS and how the DBMS can be used in particular organizations. So in the particular DBMS we can choose one topic of the transaction, and today we have discussed about only the transaction part of a DBMS. So let's start. So basic concept is what is transaction? Transaction is a unit of program execution that access and possibly update various data items. This is called definition part of a transaction. What do we mean this definition? The definition says that a transaction is a logical unit that can be exist in particular transaction. It is an amount of program or a unit of program that can be executed in a particular time. Suppose let's take example of a transaction, and we can understand what transaction means. Suppose we have a customer that has account of A, and we have another transaction. So we have another person that has account B. Suppose we can transfer from 50 rupees from A to B. This is called one transaction. That means suppose we have performed at the time of 1 second or time of 1. So it shows that T1 equal to 1, we can perform these operations. What is operation? That is transfer INR 50 from account A to B. This is steps of transaction. How these steps are transactions? We can read A, that can be read and write. These are two operations that can be performed in a particular transaction. These are the basic operation of a transaction. One is read, another is write. What is read? Read means we can access that particular data only. We cannot perform several things. We can use use from read A. Suppose read A, that means we can access that particular data item A in a read. So A equal to A minus 50. This is amount that can be transferred to the B. So we can update that particular A count in write A, and after that we can read the amount B. After V reading, we can add 50 rupees in B, and after that we can update the value of B. So here is a transaction, and that can be transaction can be performed in such a way. So suppose A has 100 rupee and B has 200 rupee. So after that operation we can use 100 minus 50. So balance of A equal to 250. Suppose V equal to 200 plus 50 rupees. So balance of B is equal to 250. Balance of B equal to 250 and balance of A equal to 50. So this is called basic transaction of particular database. So there are some issues in particular transaction. Suppose we can use the transaction. There are facing two type of issues that reported concurrently. So it is called failure of hardware and concurrent execution of multiple transactions. There are two main issues deal with transaction. Failure of various kinds such as hardware failure, system crashes, either it is multiple transaction. So it is used in that. After that, suppose we have transfer from A to B. This is the fund transfer example of transaction. After that, we can discuss about the property of a transaction. So this property is called acid property of a transaction. If any transaction that can be performed in a particular database, we can use these particular properties. What is the properties are there? These properties are called acid property. A stands for atomicity, and C stands for consistency, and I stand for isolation, and D stand for durability. So it is called acid property of a transaction. If any transaction can perform in a particular database, then we can say these property must be hold that particular transaction. So this is our basic property of atomicity, isolation, durability, and these are the properties of particular transaction. What is properties? Atomicity. So let's discuss about the one by one. First of all, we can discuss atomicity. What is atomicity? In a particular transaction, either its all operation of the transaction can perform and properly reflected in the database, either none or. What it mean? It means suppose we have a transaction T1 and we have a operation 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 4 operations that can be performed. What type of operation? Either it is read, either it is write operation. There are 2 operations in a transaction. Only either it is read, either it is write. So these 4 transactions, these 4 operations in particular transaction T1. So if that holds the property of atomicity, it means either these 4 operations performed perfectly and that can be reflected in a database. Either none can be executed. There are 2 conditions. Only either it's all can be executed, either none can be executed. So this is called atomicity property of a transaction. Right? So this is called atomicity. Now next is consistency. What do you mean by consistency? Consistency means execution of a transaction in isolation preserve the consistency of a database. Suppose we have a database and we have some states out there, some structures are there, and consistency means that can be preserved all the property, all the structures of particular database. Suppose we have a state S1 before the transaction. So after the transaction, it can be also S1, not can be changed. So this is called consistency. That means if a transaction can execute, that does not change the consistency of database. That cannot be changed a particular structure, either any view, we cannot change that particular view. Only change the data, only change the value. So we can change the value, but we cannot change the structure. We cannot change the database state. We cannot change the particular timestamp. We can change only the data. This is called consistency. That means consistency is a execution of a transaction in isolation preserve the consistency of a database. So these two properties I have discussed. Now a third property. This is a very important property of a particular transaction. Suppose we have a database and we can use the transaction in a particular day. What do you mean by the transaction in particular scenario? Suppose we have taken the live example of our transaction. Suppose we have an account in a particular bank. Suppose I have an account in a particular bank like PNB, BOB Bank or Baroda, either is it SBI. So my transaction, what type of transaction I have done in my account? I have done either it is balance check, either it is submitting the rupees, either withdrawing the rupees, either I have update my personal details. These type of transaction I have done in particular account in a bank. So these transaction can be maintained by the bank. So when we have a large number of requests in a particular database, then how we can manage, how we can arrange, how we can schedule all these transactions in a particular scenario. So for that purpose, we can fix that particular rule of the transaction. We can fix the state of a transaction. We can advantages, disadvantages. We can all these transaction related concept we can use. So these properties we can standardize, and that property must be held by the transaction. If any transaction that cannot hold any one of the property, then this is not called transaction. That is not called the transaction. Suppose we have a transaction T and that can be hold two property and two property, not hold by two property, hold, not hold. So this is not a called a transaction. Transaction can be hold these four properties. If we consist the four property, then we call the transaction. So now discuss about the third property, isolation. What is isolation? Isolation means if we have a multiple transaction and we have executed for particular time stamp. Suppose we have a time stamp of T1 and we can execute it, that transaction T1, T2, T3, either so on. Multiple transactions can be occurred in a particular time. So how the transaction can be executed? Then we have a rule of that particular transaction property that all the transactions, suppose T1, T2 and T3 and so on, these transactions must be executed isolately. What do you mean by isolately? Isolately means one transaction cannot disturb to the another transaction. Either it is one transaction that cannot be interrupt to the another transaction. It can be separately executed. So this property is called isolation. Suppose one transaction running in the database, suppose T1 and T2, both are running in the particular time stamp 7. So at the particular time stamp 7, these are executed separately, isolately. That cannot be interfere each other. T1 executed separately and T2 executed separately. This is called the isolation property of a transaction. And last property, these three properties I have discussed. Last property is durability. What do you mean by durability? Durability means a transaction completes successfully, then the change it has to meet the database persist even if there are system failure. That means suppose we have a example of a bank. Suppose I have an account in a particular PNB bank and I have withdraw some money from my account. Suppose we have I have account A and I have a value of 10,000 in my account at the time of 5:30 p.m. 16/9/25. Suppose we have a particular balance of this particular time stamp. After that, I have checked my account at the 9:30 in the morning at 7925. What is the value of this? This value can be fixed. This value cannot be changed because I have updated my value only 5:30, not 9:30. If any failure can be occur in a particular bank, suppose hardware failure, system failure, any other type of failure can be occur, but I have a same amount at that particular account because we cannot change the amount of my account. This is called durability. If suppose any transaction completed successfully and we can save that particular transaction in a database, then it can be durable. It cannot be changed at the time. Suppose I have completed my transaction successfully at 5:13:16:925 and I have checked my account in the 9:30 morning in the 17:925. So both amount are the same. We cannot change that particular amount because transaction is successfully executed at that particular time. So what purpose of durability? The durability means suppose any transaction run successfully at that particular time, then this particular amount can be reflected in the database exactly. Cannot be wrong information given by the database, because if any transaction completed successfully, it updates the value of particular data items. So in the database, I have an account of A, balance is 10,000 and this is successfully executed at the time of 5:30 p.m. And after that, we can check in 17, either it can be changed, check in the future, then it shows the balance of 10,000. So it is called durability. That means database can be durable at all the time if the transaction runs successfully. So this is the called property of transaction, and its name as acid property. Suppose I have some lots of questions around the acid property, and these questions can be successfully answered by these properties. So if any exam asked by the question, so atomicity, consistency, isolation and durability, that is the answer of that particular question. Now we can move on the another transaction topic, that is a transaction state. This is the transaction state. What do you mean transaction state? Transaction is a particular execution of a program that can be executed from one state to another state. Suppose we have a transaction T and this is the my first stage, and this can be executed T second stage. We can execute T3 third stage. We can execute it T4. So this is the state of a particular transaction, how transaction can be executed from one state to another, and what type of states are there in particular transaction. So these are the called states of a transaction. Any transaction if occurs in a particular database, then transaction must be follow these states, must be executed from these states. What are these states? Active, partially committed, failed, aborted, committed. What do you mean by active state? In an active state, this is called basic state, either it is called initial stage of a transaction. When transaction is executing, either it is starting, either it is about to start. What is that particular start? That is called in transaction is in active state. When suppose we have a live example of active state. Suppose we have some suppose we want to withdraw some money from my account. So we can go to the ATM and we can put our ATM card in a ATM machine, and then we can enter about a password. After that, we can get money from that particular ATM. So in ATM, what type of transaction has been done? Suppose once we have go to the ATM and we can insert our ATM card into the ATM machine, this is called initial stage of a transaction. That is, transaction is in active state. After active state, we can go to the partially committed state. What is partially committed state? After the final statement has been executed. Suppose we have a transaction and we have execute all the statement related to the transaction. This is called partially committed, not committed. Before committed, it is called partially committed. About to execution, about to completion of that particular transaction, that is state is called partially committed. And in this state, committed and partially committed, these are two states are there. Suppose we have a diagram of that particular states, then we can easily understand all the state from this diagram. We can start our transaction from active state, then transaction goes to the partially committed. What do you know by partially committed? Partially committed means after the final statement has been executed. And this partially committed state and committed state, before going from partially committed to committed, these two states are there. What is these two states? Failed. What do you know failed? After the discovery of the normal execution can no longer to proceed. Suppose we have some transaction in an active state. This gone to the partially committed. If partially committed state going successfully, then this transaction goes to the committed. If any error can be occurred, then this partially committed goes to the failed state. After failed state, it is goes to the aborted state. What do you mean by aborted? After the transaction has been rolled back and the database restored its prior state of the transaction, there are two type of operation can be done in a aborted. In aborted, we can perform two type of transaction. Restart the transaction, either kill that particular transaction. Because this particular aborted state transaction, either it is restarted, either it is kill the transaction, because this particular transaction not going to successfully. This particular diagram can exactly answer that particular transaction. If any successful transaction can execute, then transaction starting from active state goes to the partially committed. After that, we can committed. This is successful transaction. Successful transaction, we can go from 1, 2 and 3. Unsuccessful transaction, we can go from 1, 2, 3, suppose 4 and 5. So unsuccessful transaction goes from 1 to 4 and 5. These are the basic difference from transaction state. If any transaction can successfully executed, then we can say that 1, 2, 3, this path is followed. If unsuccessful transaction can be done, then it is follow 1, 2, 4, 5. This is the basic difference from successful transaction and unsuccessful transaction of a particular scenario. So these two type of situation can be occur in a particular transaction state, or either it is called in transaction in a particular database. So this is called states of transaction. So what is transaction? We can done, and we can done about the properties of a transaction. We can done about the transaction state. After the transaction state, we can start from concurrent execution. What is concurrent execution? Concurrent executions means, suppose we have some particular database. Suppose we have taking the example of a bank. In a bank, there are so many accounts up there. In a particular branch, we have a number of accounts. So that particular number of accounts can be access that particular amount or account at a time. So multiple transactions can be executed at a particular time. So this is called concurrent execution of a transaction. And how we can manage that particular transactions? Because in the transaction we have lots of queries are there. So it is the property of a transaction that can be multiple transactions are allowed to run concurrently in the system. What are their benefits and disadvantages of multiple transaction? Low. So discuss. Suppose advantages. What is the advantage of concurrent execution? In the concurrent execution, it can be increase the processor and disk utilization. Suppose one transaction can be using the CPU. At that particular time, another transaction is reading, either it is writing. So it can be run both way. One transaction is using CPU, another transaction is using CPU, but at that particular time, they can use only the reading part, either it is writing part. So both transactions run separately and done its work. So it can be utilized that particular time. At same time, we can use processor from one transaction. We can another time, same time we can use reading or writing operation of a disk. So it can be increase the processor utilization and it can be disk utilization, increase the disk utilization. If processor and disk utilization can be done in efficient way, then it can says that the transaction throughput can be increased. Throughput means performance per unit time. Suppose we have a transaction, then what is transaction throughput? Transaction throughput means output of a transaction per unit time is called throughput. What is the disadvantages of that particular transaction? The disadvantages of particular transaction is reduce average response time. Suppose we have a transaction, short transaction, suppose we have a transaction of 2 seconds, 3 seconds, either it is 5 seconds, then transaction needs not wait behind long one. Suppose we have taken the example of, suppose we have a transaction of T1, another transaction T2. T1 is about to 10 seconds and T2 is 2 seconds. Suppose we can start that particular transaction, then 10 seconds, T2 can wait 10 seconds because it can be executed, then T2 can be started. So this is reduce average response time of a particular transaction. So this is the basic advantage and disadvantages. There are so many types of transaction can be executed in a particular scenario. So if we can allow multiple transactions run at a time, this is called concurrent execution of a transaction. And this is are the advantages and disadvantages. Advantages are increase the processor, disk utilization that can be leads to the throughput, better throughput. And disadvantages, that is reduce average response time. This is called concurrent execution. And after the concurrent execution, we can use some schemes, some algorithms that can be manage that particular transaction. Suppose we have a bank and we have a lots of query at that particular time. Suppose we have a timestamp of T1 and we receive from customer request 1 lakh per second or per minute. then how we can manage that particular request from the received from the customer? We use some algorithm, we use some rules, we use some we create some setups or rules that can follow that particular transaction and automate that particular transaction. We cannot manage that huge amount of the transaction request at a particular time by manually. We can manage that particular algorithm. We can use some basic rules. We can use some scheme that can manage that particular transaction request. Suppose we have a account in PNB Bank and 10,000 requests per second received. How we can manage 10,000? Suppose it is 10,000. After another 10 seconds, we have received 20,000 requests per second. So in 2 seconds, we have got the 30,000 requests in a particular amount. We cannot manage that particular transaction request by manually. We can use some software, we can use some algorithm that can manage that particular request. So it is called concurrency control scheme. We can use that concurrently scheme mechanism to achieve isolation. We can manage all the requests isolately and we can fix that particular order to prevent some destroying the consistency of a database. So what is a concurrency control scheme? That is the mechanism to achieve isolation. That means to control the interaction among the concurrent executions in order to prevent them from destroying the consistency of a database. We can use some algorithms in particular way. So this is the next part of our transaction, that is schedule. In a particular schedule, we can, what is schedule? We can use a sequence of instructions that can specify the chronological order in which instructions or concurrent transactions are executed. What do you mean by schedule? Schedule means, suppose we have some schedule S. What is schedule? That is T1, T2. In T1, we have some data items, read, write, read, write. So this is called schedule. This whole box is called schedule, one schedule. That means schedule is a set of transactions that can be executed concurrently. That means a schedule for a set of transactions must consist of all the instructions of those transactions, must preserve the order in which instructions appear in a particular transaction. So what is schedule? Schedule means that can be run in a particular scenario. It must be preserved the order which instructions appear in an individual transaction. A transaction that successfully completes its execution will have a commit transaction in the last statement. By default, all the transactions assumed to be executed commit instruction at its last step. A transaction that fails to successfully completes its execution with have a abort instruction as the last statement. In a particular transaction scenario, it is called schedule. Schedule has some transaction that can be executed concurrently. It is called schedule. Suppose we have taken the example of a schedule. What do you mean by schedule? This is the basic example of our particular schedule. Suppose we have taken the example in a particular transaction. Suppose we have a transfer from $50 from A to B and transaction T2 from 10% of the balance from A to B. This two type of transaction run separately and that can be managed in a particular time. In a particular time, this is called schedule. What is schedule? schedule is a T1. Suppose we have some T1 schedule, we have a T2 schedule. In a T1 schedule, read, item, read, write and commit transaction in a T1, and in a T2, read temporary variable, we can manage, we can read and write, and we can use the commit operation also. So this is the basic schedule of a transaction. In a particular transaction, we can use this particular schedule. So we can easily started that particular schedule. This is the basic example of a schedule. We can use that particular schedule from one transaction to another transaction. In next lecture, we can discuss about all type of transaction schedules and how we can manage that particular schedule and how we can manage schedules, not transaction. In this lecture, we have discussed about the what is transaction, what is transactions are, and this is second we have discussed about acid property. This is discussed about the state. Then we can discuss concurrent execution. Then we can use concurrency control and schedule. These topic we have already discussed in particular lecture series. Next lecture series we can use elaborate from schedule, how we can schedule, we can manage. We can manage that particular schedule in next lecture. So let's discuss in next.